Thanks a lot. I will be a bit unusual speaker for this meeting. First of all, you will have all the time of my speech illustration in video. And that's really something unusual, but as journalists are telling it, that images speaks better than words. I hope you will enjoy these images, although they're a bit threatening. The second point which I want to tell is that I would tell nothing about order or unorder or disorder of this world. You'll have your own possibility to conclude. I wouldn't touch it at all. The only word which I'm telling about order are now. And the third remark which I want to give as an introduction, that Chernobyl for me, it's not only the energy issue for Russia. Chernobyl is an image of environmental catastrophe which happens in the country and which may happen further on. By the way, Chernobyl is not in Russia, Chernobyl is Ukraine. Just to be clear, sometimes it's a sensitive issue. Generally, and I was in Chernobyl many times since '92, so probably a couple of dozens of times, bringing journalists and making certain research, taking samples, and in fact, it is threatening. It looks awful. But speaking generally, there are no yet environmental catastrophes, neither in Russia, not in the world. It's not yet there. But we are slightly moving, and Russia is an example of what direction the world as a whole is moving nowadays. The main reason what is happening in Russia now, and which is causing all other consequences, is catastrophe in people's minds. Not environmental catastrophe, but real catastrophe in minds. That is related both to environmental protection, to nuclear area, and to other areas as well, but that I wouldn't touch at all. And that's occurring both in the residents' minds as well as in the official minds. And who is leading the whole thing? The whole catastrophe in the minds of Russian president, former or future Vladimir Putin, who is, by the way, a good friend of Mr. Schroeder, is leading in this catastrophe. So what is happening in Russia generally? Environmentalists are normally speaking about catastrophic situation. Environment is protection and the nuclear industry, which is often argued by skeptics that exaggeration, that nothing is happening, and that big scale of the big square of the country neutralize everything which is happening. It is not really true. And the major part of the dirty production of industry is consumed by nature. But it is slightly moving to the catastrophe. And you can see some pictures on the screen of what is happening. With two exceptions, all these pictures was taken during the last 3 years. So it's not something which is coming back from the history. It's current situation. It's simply not visible to many people in the country. And the system of protection of nature is totally collapsed as well. Like one very funny example, funny, it's not a proper word, one very strange example is there are only 40,000 people who are involved in nature protection control in the country together, and from them only 15,000 are doing not paperwork. To compare with 130,000, which was 10 years ago, means that it is at least 8 times decrease of those people who are involved. With nuclear control issues, it's even worse, because it was reorganized during 20 years 18 times, which technically means that there are no people left inside. And if you look on nuclear regulations in the country, significant part of the rights to regulate nuclear industry was given to the same company which is managing nuclear power plants, Rosatom, state-owned company, which is both developing nuclear, managing nuclear power, producing energy, and regulating their own activities. So that's what is happening now, and that is clearly showing that catastrophe is in the officials' mind who are doing that. What was the reason of changing attitude of this environmental attitude? A decade ago, officials was thinking that there are only environmental protection laws and physical activities which prevent development of industry. And authorities was dreaming that industry will immediately jump up when all the environmental regulations will be cancelled. Regulations were cancelled, but nothing happens. There are no development of industry at all. It's still continuing. The only change which happens is that a lot of dirty industries was restarted in Russia or moved to Russia. And one of the examples, and that will be the last example about general nature protection, is a plant which is called Norilski nickel. Maybe you've heard about this complex which is located in Arctic, and it's emitting approximately 10% of substances emitted in Russia. It's a city of 400,000 people. It's located in Arctic. There are no environmental control body in this city. They are not monitoring atmospheric conditions in this city since 2003. The explanation is that the office of the body is a bad condition, that it needs reparations. Since 2003, they don't find out any money to repair the office of control service in Norilsk. At the same time, there are around 700 such offices in Russia, and few of them was constructed in connection with the Olympic Games, which are planned for 2014 by Mr. Putin as well. So you can compare the attitude and see how it works. And just recently, a couple of weeks ago, provincial authorities allowed this plant not to pay environmental taxes because it's quite poor. By the way, that's also a good example of Russian political system, because for those who are familiar with Russian elections, as you know, in coming presidential elections, there is also another candidate, Prokhorov, another candidate for the presidency, who is very often accepted as a liberal candidate by public. In fact, Mr. Prokhorov, for 10 years, was owner of the shares of Norilsk Nickel and top manager of this plant. And he personally is responsible for the facts which are happening there, and for 300,000 hectares of forest at least, which were nearly destructed by this plant. That reflects well the system and attitude. And some figures and facts. In European Russia, less than 10% of intact forest left. In Siberia, less than 30%. When you are telling about intact Siberia, it's not true. It is not intact anymore. It was seriously carted. The amount of oil which is flowing to Arctic Ocean from Russia, according to official records, is 500,000 tons a year, which is approximately 1/4 of the oil which is leaking to the oceans in the world. 1/4 only through Arctic rivers. Official data from the Russian state services, which I can confirm you are right. Share of drinking water source samples, which doesn't correspond with sanitary norms, is around 30%. Just to compare it with what was in 85 during Soviet times, it was twice more. And no one big river become quality of no one of big river become better since 95. I cannot find the previous records, they're complicated to find. More than 100 cities in the country have an air pollution higher than allowable level. With the nuclear industries, there are 32 nuclear reactors from which, nuclear units in Russia, from which you should consider as a big one, 28. 4 of them are based very far away and are very small. And there are plans to construct in coming 15-20 years, 15 to 35 new nuclear units. There are different documents and different decisions, but 15 is the lowest figure. And after Fukushima catastrophe, the nuclear plans become even more ambitious, differently from any other part of the world. They are planning to build more. And similar to 85, the officials are explaining that the Russian, at that time it was Soviet, nuclear reactors are the safest in the world. It was publication in the EIA magazine in 85 when reactors of Chernobyl type, at that time it was RBMK reactors, there are no word Chernobyl type yet, are the safest. Now the same is told about the Russian reactors. It is not so far from Japanese telling in 2010 that Japanese nuclear industry is one of the safest, is not the safest one of the world, but the plans are already there. And what are the reasons of these plans? There are several of them, and I will analyze a few of them, but one of the reasons, which is quite important, is that the reserves of the Gazprom and gas reserves in Russia are decreasing. And in several years, they will decrease in an extent that there will be not enough gas to export. And they want to replace internal gas consumption by nuclear, which sounds a bit strange, but how it works. And it's interesting to give one general figure which compares worldwide development of environmental situation in different countries, which was performed by the Yale University. And Russia, in the environmental trends, occupy the last place in the world as of data from 2012. 132 countries, and 132nd place is Russia's place in environmental trends in the world. 106th place is in the among the environmental condition, environmental performance index. By the way, Germany occupies 56th place, and the conditions are in terms of changes, and in terms of condition, Germany occupies 11th place. So not bad, I would tell. Comparably to Russia, it's dramatically high. And that's what finally happens. Chernobyl was not the only nuclear catastrophe in Russia, and just to excuse, I'm using not EIA terms, I'm using terms which I'm feeling are right. It was a catastrophe, and there were several nuclear catastrophes before. Some of them are still hidden and unknown. Information is, if not classified, absolutely unreachable. For example, Leningrad nuclear power plant 75, information is not available. Chazma explosion of nuclear submarine 85, just a year before Chernobyl. Information is hardly can be found out, suppressed. It was suppressed by untrained people, and I think information is classified because it's very limited information in public minds. There were also important catastrophes which seems to be similar to Chernobyl in terms of scale, happening in 57 and 67, when it was explosion of middle-level waste storage next to Ural Mountains, and when the storm distributes the sand, polluted sand, during very dry summer from the lake where radioactive substances were discharged. At the time of the event, 400,000 people were somehow irradiated, few villages were resettled, but 3 villages was left inside, till now. One of them already gone, but not because it was resettled, but 2 villages are still in the area which is not allowable for people to leave, even now. And last 3 years, one of the village was resettled partly by Rosatom, this nuclear company which is exploiting stations. The people were moved in the zone which is still polluted according to the law, but a bit closer to the cemetery of this village. So the whole thing became much more comfortable for them, and there was direct corruption involved. Surprisingly, the state money or corporation money was given for this resettlement to a fund organized by 3 private persons. And although we were writing a lot of complaints to the officials, the only case when they start investigation, when we managed to present a paper about corruption directly to President Medvedev. Only when he read and he sees that there was a 40% of this 25,000 euro given to people, a kickback of 40% requested in the official documents. In conclusion, only after that investigation started, there was a search in Rosatom and this corporation done. 1 person was arrested, probably several people were arrested, but that is an illustration of the whole situation with the nuclear industry now. It's not what happens 25, 26 years ago. It's what is happening just now. When you see this corruption, total disorder, sorry for using this word, in the nuclear energy system. And total attitude to the people who are suffering can only happen as a result of total disbalance in the minds of officials. I'm supporting my first thesis is that it's total disbalance in the mind of officials, spending money for Olympic Games, 12 billion which are coming there, and having 25,000 for those people who are suffering in the village for a settlement, which is honestly not enough, physically not enough. You need at least 40 to be resettled normally to the village to construct a building. What was the reason of this 25,000? It's a very interesting comparison story. When Putin was involved in the firefighting issue and used it for political debates, he promised and give to people 50,000 euro for a settlement for those who suffer from fires. And these people from nuclear village was not involved in any political campaigns. That was just a thing which need to be done. And it's 25,000. Just for those who don't know exactly the figures, how much money liquidators from Chernobyl are receiving now in Russia, it's a bit less than 10 euros per month, 370 rubles. For those who know how much ruble is, you can imagine what is it. It's monthly payment for the people who were involved and who suffer, which is proved from Chernobyl liquidation 26 years ago. Not too many of them are left, but it's what is given to them by the state. That's why it's also demonstrates the attitude and how trustful can be these authorities. After that, even taking away all the technical issues, I would not trust to what are they telling me about technical safety. I would suggest that they are lying immediately knowing the other story. Anyway, shortage of nuclear specialists is another story with the Russian nuclear problem, and safety of the reactors is also a question mark. And the most important development which happens recently is constructing of floating nuclear reactor, which will supply electricity to any distant point, starting from Indonesia and South America up to the northern part of Russia. That construction will be finished in 1.5 years as max, and we'll have another strange facility which will produce the most expensive electricity in the world, whatever you can imagine. But still it's under construction. And the question mark is, what is the reason of such attitude? And many people ask me informally here, what is the reason of Russia developing nuclear program after what happens in Fukushima, after having Chernobyl experience? And there are several reasons which we can only guess. But the first one is definitely lobbying. And what else can I add to that? But the second, which is probably most important, is that current Russian officials, including Putin, including Medvedev and others, for whatever reasons believe that if you want to have the great country, you need to have nuclear energy. And that's, after that, they don't listen any arguments. In fact, they don't take anything in mind. They believe that country must have nuclear energy, and let's go ahead. And also, they are not listening arguments and don't believe into alternatives. They believe that alternatives are a kind of a toys of rich countries, and the literacy of top officials in the nuclear issues is like nothing. I can give you one example. Just recently, Vladimir Putin publicly stated that windmills are dangerous for the environment because they destroy soil worms. It was a formal statement by Putin published. What else can I tell about the qualification of the person? And that is Chernobyl. That is also another thing why alternatives is a problem one, is that government can hardly manage a big number of smaller facilities. They even cannot manage separate waste collection in big cities. They prefer to bring it together and then incinerate instead of separating, which is quite easy thing. But still, as my time is coming to the end, I will try to be very short. So, first of all, there are several things which are connected with nuclear in Russia. Lack of information and falsification of information. It's still happening. We can hardly get information on what happens after certain nuclear incidents, or it's very complicated. True information is not coming, and when we speak about the information, it should be first of all true, and it's not coming. The second thing, there are no emergency plan for existing nuclear facility for local residents. It does not exist for the villages which are surrounding nuclear power plant. It is still consequences of nuclear energy are not known and not fully evaluated. The official, one of the official statements of Rosatom was that there was 32 people who died from Chernobyl only. Why? If you take demographic data, just demographic data, and properly apply demographic science, you will see that only in Russia around 40,000 people died during 24 years after Chernobyl. And generally, including Soviet Union, there will be around 100,000 to 150, and you should add at least the same number of people in Europe. But it's another story about consequences. And as I have very short time, then I will tell about the attitude of population. I was telling about the officials. Population, unfortunately, is also behaving quite conformist. And generally, people are split more or less half by half, with a bit bigger than 50% supporting nuclear energy. A bit bigger. The only time when population is starting to fight against nuclear power plant and when they become aware about nuclear power, it's when the plant is planned near in their backyard, in their province. Then 80% of people become aware, and 80 to 90% of people don't want nuclear power to be constructed in their region. But unfortunately, according to the national laws, their voice doesn't mean anything. And there was already a referendum in one of the Russian provinces which vote against nuclear power, but the Supreme Court tells that it's wrong voting. They have no right, and nuclear power was constructed. It's now there. So I'm trying to finalize the whole thing. General conclusions, few general conclusions, and if somebody will like to ask me questions, I can answer questions after the lecture, so please do it. And my belief is that environment and technological disasters generally are cased in the first, and not because of bad technologies or unsafe technologies. The first wrong thing is what I've told. It's a bad minds, it's disorder in people's minds, which is in turn causing using of bad technologies or unsafe technologies or improper using of good technologies. And very often people, and starting from the officials, but also human beings, just ordinary human beings, are not ready to think about long-term consequences. They believe that events which just have possibility will never happen in their backyard. That's what happens with Chernobyl, that's what happens with Fukushima, that's what may happen with other nuclear plants. I would remind the statement which we, as Greenpeace International, we did at 20th anniversary of Chernobyl 6 years ago, that there are obviously no question if next nuclear catastrophe happens. There is only a question when it will happen and where. And since that time Fukushima happens. I can repeat these words. There are no question if next nuclear catastrophe happens. It will inevitably happen. It's only a question when and where. And that's why it's much better to escape all the technologies which are threatening and with a small possibility, which have a capacity to influence half of the globe, like it happens with Chernobyl. And with the environment itself, it's also a question with the climate changes, which is the most threatening problem now. There are a lot of environmental problems worldwide, but with the one which is really coming and which is inevitable, it's climate change. And there are a lot of governments who are behaving selfish and believe that either the job will be done by somebody else or that the job will be done when they will retire. And I think that is what needs to be resolved. At the end, I would like to tell that I was not trying to be too pessimistic. I was trying just to bring some objective information. Unfortunately, that was not academic lecture, but I hope that you enjoyed. And now you have a chance to judge about order or disorder. Thank you.